I think most of us collectors could only dream of ripping into some of these items. Not many of us have an extra $50K to throw away hoping to find a huge hit. But what if I told you you don't need to spend 50 grand to know what's inside? Well, recently there's been a lot of buzz surrounding the topic of people using CT scanners in the collectibles world and being able to peek inside any one of these high-end sealed products, but without breaking a seal and without leaving a trace. And the one and only change is that the mystery inside is now gone. Well, this past summer, the news broke of a guy who'd been using a CT scanner to look inside packs of Pokémon to find the hits. Obviously, this brings up a lot of questions around ethics, so I encourage you to leave a comment and share your thoughts and feelings. But for now, let's meet one of the people who will forever be known as one of the disruptors of an industry.
Hello and welcome back to Wayne's Strange Brain. This is probably just going to be 10 minutes of me rambling and talking about a project that I've been working on for a little over 2 years now. And the thing I'm referring to is being able to look inside a pack of Pokemon cards or other trading cards without actually opening the pack.
So perhaps not quite the sinister character you were expecting. This is Aaron Wayne. He's a hobbyist collector and a guy that makes his living working with CT scanners and interpreting the data. And he's one of the first to experiment with CT scanning on sealed collectibles, or at least one of the first to show his face doing it. So there's a lot of elements to the story, but maybe the most incredible is that the CT scanner he's experimenting with doesn't cost $1 million. In fact, it's a lot cheaper than $1 million and quite a bit more DIY.
There was an opportunity to buy a CT scanner on eBay. It was local pickup only. It was an hour away from my house, and I went with a coworker and we saw it. It was like in a guy's garage, and I spent 3 months fixing it. Look at this. I made a grid to unwarp the detector.
So Aaron buys a CT scanner off eBay for $1,500. And definitely check out his channel if you want to know more about the story of the sale, plus all the fixes he does to make the CT scanner operational. But one thing to note is that he didn't just buy and fix this scanner so he could maximize profits from card collecting. For him, it's not just about trying to make money. And he has a cool story on his channel about working on a history project with a team from people around the world, where he's able to use his CT scanner to analyze ancient scrolls and to be able to read them without unrolling or damaging them. But of course, he was also very curious to see if this technology that he works with all day would allow him to look inside a sealed Pokemon pack. And I guess a big question is, would a $1,500 refurbished CT scanner see anything?
I've got these 2 packs. I was actually in Utah and I saw these packs for $250 each. They were in a little game shop, and they said they were brought in by an old lady with a shoebox. And if you know anything about packs, you know that they can be weighed, these old ones, and you can tell whether there's a foil inside. And there's probably not a foil inside because the world should be skeptical. But it turned out that they were telling the truth, and there was a foil inside, and there was a foil inside both. And so here you go. First edition Jungle, we've got a pincer. In first edition Fossil, we've got a Gengar.
Wow, pretty interesting stuff. But here's something pretty crazy. Right around the exact same time that Aaron was conducting these Pokemon scanning experiments, there was another CT scan experiment going on. But this time it's not a dude who bought an old scanner on Craigslist. These experiments were being done by a business, and a business that owned multi-million-dollar equipment. And this company is offering this as a service to customers. Let's meet another face who's changed the trading card hobby, because what their machine is able to do is incredibly powerful.
But we can see names, we can see outlines, we can see details of cards. In the sports realm, we can see if there's any there's patch material, we can definitely see that.
Right.
So this is Brad Kellis, and he works for Industrial Inspection and Consulting LLC. And also, he doesn't look quite so sinister either. The interview is being conducted by Nick Andrews, who runs the Sports Card Madness channel. And he conducts a really in-depth interview. I've clipped some key parts, but I encourage you to check out his channel. So let's focus back on Nick's interview with Brad from Industrial and his questions about how they're using a high-powered $1 million CT scanner to peek inside sealed collectibles.
This sounds like it can get through anything. It can see anything. Modern and ultra modern. The audience will understand what I'm talking about, but that's essentially cards that were manufactured in the 90s and beyond, especially ones that are silver or embossed or whatever. So very interesting. I think all of the modern hobby can be affected by this, which is fascinating.
So as I mentioned earlier, Industrial is offering CT scanning of packs and boxes as a service. It's currently priced at $75 per pack. And even though there have been claims that CT scanning collectibles has been happening for years, Industrial has only just started offering this as a service. And a curious part of the story is that Brad and his team kind of backed into this idea when trying to solve a completely different problem.
And so for us, in an effort to try and market our system that we have to greater audiences, we're just kind of going back and forth over what's something that we can do to really, we were trying to target the medical industry. So like pharmaceuticals, blister packs for like medicines and whatnot. And someone had the idea of like, well, let's see if we can find something that's thin but has contrast. Someone said, well, why don't we go get a Pokemon card? And once we got the scan data and were able to process through it and see what we're able to come up with, it blew our minds. But we didn't necessarily think from the standpoint of, okay, wow, we just found something new. It was, this is great. We could use this to go after manufacturing stuff. And then about a couple hours later, we're like, wait a minute. So it really just came up from a conversation over how can we market ourselves better.
So I guess a little bit of a happy accident that some marketing ideas result in discovering a brand new service to add to your business. And it's definitely becoming a service. We'll get more into showing some actual specific cards that are being scanned and things to watch out for, but I thought Nick and Brad cover some important details.
I know you guys offered to have me do a demo. I think my first demo is going to be an 86 Fleer pack, a slabbed 86 Fleer pack, so you can get through the plastic, and we are going to find out what's in there. My question before I do that, and I hand you a pack that's worth $2,000, does it damage the cards at all? Will the CAT scan process damage paper or damage the card or darken it or anything like that?
Yeah, the radiation, it's not going to cause anything to break down, or there will be no physical changes, no chemical changes. It's going to be the same coming out as it was when it went in.
All right, but let's switch now to one of the key topics they cover in this video. And I think it's something we're all thinking about.
All right, so let's talk about the elephant in the room. We're going to get into the ethics of this. I want to understand your take as a company doing this. You know, just some thoughts here. Do you think it's cheating? Do you think you are ruining the hobby or this hobby? Do you think that this is ethical to do, to see inside something that wasn't meant to be seen inside and was meant to be a surprise? Like, how do you feel about all this going forward?
So, you know, and that is the elephant in the room. It's something that we have wrestled with internally. It's a daily conversation. It feels like it's never ending for us.
All right, so you actually care. You are talking about this. That's good.
Yeah, and in our opinions, it's not like we sit down and say, all right, let's talk about this. Yep, we still agree. We're good. Like there is some discourse that happens on a regular basis. We're like, well, what about this? Oh man, okay. Well, what about that? And it's not necessarily stuff that we haven't really thought of, but it's as we process it further, we're getting multiple layers deep into the moral side of this. And we're like, okay, yeah, this is a much bigger deal than we initially anticipated it to be. Again, this was a case study that we were going to use to try and sell our abilities to the medical industry, and here we are.
God forbid, God help you that you did a Pokemon pack, my friend.
Yeah, seriously, man.
And so where do you stand on all of this? Is this good for the hobby? Is it okay if someone's using a $1,500 scanner to scan Pokemon packs? Is that okay? Does the fact that Industrial uses a multi-million-dollar machine make this a lot worse? Or is this all despicable, low-class, shady behavior? Or is it just up to collectors and manufacturers to adapt? I think what this shows is that this is a very complicated subject. So I encourage you to share your thoughts. Here's the juicy stuff we've all been waiting for. Now it's time to see what X-ray vision really looks like. In this chapter, we're gonna get a closer look of what exactly is being scanned. Because whether you collect sports cards or Pokemon, there's some pretty crazy examples of this tech in action.
Just wanted to show you what the demo looks like. Cards in the middle there. You see Mathewson on the bottom left. You got the Gooden on the bottom left. The cards are on the top right. The scanner is zipping through them. That's that red line. The pack is on the bottom right, including the box. I mean, this is just a box of Stadium Club, and you can see all the names easily because they're embossed. Individual thin cards, no problem. Cosman, Jones, I think Derek, there's Derek Jeter, bottom left. So this is having no issue. These are foil packs.
I also came across another good video where this guy from the Pokemon world, from the channel OKJ Love, so he also connects with Industrial and creates some really good videos on this subject. And he was able to get a bunch of stuff scanned to see what the process was like.
They're not paying me for this video, but they did offer this story as an exclusive reveal. So I took that as an opportunity to see how many different things they could scan beyond just a booster pack. And the results are actually crazy. So we started with Pokemon and I got them to test an Elite Trainer Box, a ETB, and sure enough, we got some results here. So you can kind of see the ability there, Dewguard, that's for a Militich. But if you go a little bit further, and you can see there that they've managed to pick up a Garbodor VMAX. So this is crazy because there are a lot of layers of plastic and cardboard. You've got the dice markers, you've got just a bunch of stuff kind of like obfuscating the view there, but they still managed to find a card. And then I think the one that's going to blow the lid off the Pokemon card sealed world entirely, a booster box. So they did scan a booster box of Twilight Masquerade. This is the most recent set, but the results here have trickle-down effects for everything all the way to vintage. And if you scroll through this video and you have a look, you can see the silhouette there of a Frostlass. So that's just a rare card. And going a bit further, then you can see the wings of a Zapdos. So this traditional holo is easier to identify. So this is still really early days, it looks like, for booster box scanning, but things are kind of out of place, but you're still able to get some level of accuracy here. Scanning is absolutely mind-boggling and suggests, at least to me, that you're going to be able to replicate this for older sets all the way down to vintage. It's just a matter of time.
Well, pretty incredible stuff to see. And then to get another voice from the Pokemon world, I also checked in on the channel of Rattle Pokemon. I became aware of his channel and content when I was researching the BBCE Logan Paul Pokemon story a few years ago. And so I was curious to hear his take. And it sounds like he's not too happy about what this new tech brings to the hobby and Pokemon world.
Crazy stuff. And I'm just like going through the eras in my mind, thinking about like all the textured stuff that is like chase card, chase card, chase card. Basically, I can't think of an era where the chase card won't be detectable here. The gold stars are going to be like just painfully obvious because the foil is on the Pokemon itself. So those are loose packs, gold star hunting. Very, very dangerous stuff.
So yeah, if you're hunting for hits and loose packs of Pokemon, buyer beware. And if you're a basketball collector, here's another product affected.
The 2012 Prism, it's the first year that Prism launched for the NBA. Those are all embossed. Those are all metallic. Yep. Every single one of those cards. The packs go for about $200. The cases go for, I don't know, $5,000, something like that. And there's 4 cards in a pack. If you pull like the Kobe autograph out of one of those, it's a $10,000 card.
Well, if Superman did have Kryptonite, are there any sets or product that Brad and the Industrial team can't see inside?
What cards are you having trouble doing this with right now? Like what's not working well? I think on your website you had Magic the Gathering. There was too much ink or something like that.
Yeah, so Magic the Gathering, that's one right off the top. Just because it's any cards that don't have the presence, I mentioned a little bit earlier, if there's no foil, if there's no emboss, if there's no signature, or there's no like any materials that are different in it that could define it from one to the other, then we're going to struggle to identify. Just plain and simple. Older vintage packs like you were talking about earlier, where the 1950 some odd early packs that are just paper and ink, those are the ones we struggle with the most.
That's good to know. So everybody that's freaking out and the sky's falling, if you're into vintage, it's not so bad. If you're into this new shiny stuff, huge change coming.
And so I think it's important to point out here that vintage in sports cards is different than vintage in Pokemon. Vintage in sports cards could be packed from the 80s, but obviously a lot earlier. And of course, Pokemon came out in 1996. So there's a big difference when comparing vintage Pokemon to vintage sports cards.
Could you see if there's a Michael Jordan card inside of a wax pack, like a card that says Michael Jordan on it, or looks like the example?
So that would depend on, there's a handful of factors. So if the name or if any feature of the card is embossed into the card, we could see that. If there's any foil embedded in the card, we could see that. Signatures, if it's done with like a ballpoint pen. So markers, not so much, but if it's done with a ballpoint pen where they can see the indentation of them writing their name, we can see that.
Interesting.
And then there's several different factors. So if it's a Michael Jordan card with no foil, no embossing, no signatures, no patch or anything, it would be a toss-up. But if there's any of those 4 criterias, we should be able to find it.
Yeah, so basically any modern card can be looked at. Vintage seems a little safer because I don't think 86 Fleer has any of those prerequisites. So I know you guys offered to have me do a demo. I think my first demo is going to be an 86 Fleer pack.
Well, definitely subscribe to the Sports Card Madness channel to see the results. Will they be able to see inside of a pack of 86 Fleer basketball? Can you find a Michael Jordan rookie card with just a CT scanner? Could you use the tech to see if the MJ sticker has too much gum or wax residue? And in another video, Nick also mentions that he plans on sending in 5 packs of 2012 Prism basketball, so keep your eyes open for the reveal videos on his channel. But here's another voice, and he brings a little bit of a different take. I think we can call him an influencer. You may recognize him from this.
My name is Jeff Wilson. By day, I invest in tech companies, and at night, I invest in sports cards. Join me on my journey to profit from the hobby we all love. Hello, sports card investors, and welcome to another episode. And folks, I've got...
So Jeff Wilson is definitely a pretty big influencer in the sports card world. He has multiple YouTube channels that together have almost 500,000 subscribers, and that's just on YouTube alone. And this was his take on things.
So this really, in my opinion, is much ado about very little. It's not nothing. I mean, yeah, it's not great that people can scan and all this stuff, but like the amount of hype, how this thing has been blown up. When I think about it critically, I think this thing has just been blown way out of proportion, and in actuality, there's really not that much danger to 99% of the collectors out there, especially those who like me and most of the customers in Cards HQ, like to rip an occasional box of Topps Chrome after it comes out. You are perfectly fine. You got nothing to worry about, in my opinion.
So where do you fit in all of this? Are you in the 1% that Jeff Wilson is talking about, or the 99%? Personally, I don't think this should be categorized as much ado about very little, but I'll address that a bit later on in the show. For now, there's another area in the hobby that might be affected by CT scanning. And OKJ Love, our Pokemon guy, brings up some good points from Aaron Wayne's $1,500 CT scanner video when it comes to grading.
This is probably the coolest part of the work that Aaron did, in my opinion anyway. His tech has developed to this point where you're actually able to measure the distances on the card, which means you should be able to like pre-grade the card through the pack and know whether it's worth opening the pack or not. Because the pack you've got could have the rarest card from that set. Maybe it's the Gengar from Fossil, or maybe it's the Charizard from base set. But if you can look at the borders and measure to the millimeter that it's potentially off center, so it's not going to get that perfect 10 grade, then you're better off just keeping the card inside the pack instead of opening it.
And no surprise, the same thoughts are happening for sports cards.
They can actually look at centering within down to the micron. So they could look into a pack, see if this Tom Brady rookie card is in it. And if you look over here, it's like 3.2537 millimeters. That is a micron. You can look at this card, right? This is like centered like a 6. So you may say to yourself, all right, what is a Tom Brady 6 worth? Not enough. And you might just resell the pack, right? Just not even the fact that the card's in there, but the card in there isn't up to the quality that you expect or want.
So again, pretty wild stuff to think it's now possible to see the hit card you're looking for, but if it's not centered properly, collectors can decide to keep it in the pack. Obviously they could possibly resell it too. And then it's up to them whether they disclose what information they have. Crazy stuff to think about. But then the flip side of this is, what if you see a perfectly centered card inside that pack? Well, what now?
So there's insane potential for grading cards, and Aaron has actually spoken a little bit. You can see in the description of his video, he may present this technology to grading companies and see where it goes from there.
It's going to be interesting to see where this goes in terms of how grading companies might consider using CT scanning to enhance their offerings. And so Aaron Wayne brings up a pretty interesting concept to try and wrap your head around.
I don't know what I want to do with these. I don't want to open them because the thing is, I have no idea what this does to the value, because if you think about it, an action figure is worth more when it's still in the box, and these are still in the pack. So if this was a PSA 10 when you opened it, well, what would it be when it's still in the pack? It's an 11? I don't know.
The concept of grading a pack and then maybe the label saying that it has a PSA 10 Charizard inside of it is insane. It's hard to even process, but at the same time, it feels like just another thing that is offered to collectors, and that's what makes the hobby cool. And it's kind of why I think the hobby is dead statements are short-sighted. This is just an evolution, or maybe it's a mutation of what we've come to expect and what we see as like the standard right now.
If you've ever sent anything in for grading, your head might be spinning. Another person that seems to be thinking about this in a similar way and seeing things from multiple angles is Nat Turner. He's the CEO of PSA, a huge card collector. He has a super high-end collection, and credit goes again to Sports Card Madness for connecting with the PSA CEO.
I remember going to Target or Walmart as a kid and seeing the little, like, someone took a scissor to, like, in 93 Upper Deck or 94 Upper Deck, I think it was. They'd put a little slit in the pack, and then they'd shine a light and see if there's a die cut card. And you know, then you have the
scales.
Drug scales. Yeah, I mean, people have been trying ways to inspect, and you obviously have resealed wax packs and all sorts of stuff. But obviously, that's the question: what's in the pack, right?
Right.
And people go to great lengths to figure that out. Apparently, it's awesome. I mean, look, I think it's awesome in the sense that this is, you know, like disruption, innovation at its finest.
Yeah.
The hobby's going to have to respond somehow.
What's your observation on how it will impact the hobby? And
I think it's certainly a disruption. You know, I've seen the videos. I've seen the, like, you know, it identifies logo mans inside of flawless cases. Mm-hmm. First of all, for boxes produced before today, I think, you know, as a potential buyer of those boxes, you have to be very cautious. You basically have to assume that the, you know, box has been scanned. So I think you could see a price correction in, you know, boxes that are thrown up on eBay, for example, perhaps. But I think, you know, manufacturers, I think, are going to have to respond.
So Nat didn't really address anything that PSA is going to do in the video, but he's definitely paying attention. So when the story of CT scanning collectibles first broke back in June, it was being talked about in niche circles, with debates happening in YouTube comment sections and in online forums. But then in December, everything changes. Because it wasn't just YouTubers digging up stuff on stories anymore. In just 6 months, it now becomes a legit investigation. And a reporter visits the industrial inspection facility to see their multi-million-dollar collectible scanner in action. And this is when the New York Times gets involved. A new story emerges, pushed out to their subscriber base of more than 11 million readers. A story that covers thousands of boxes being scanned, a growing market of resellers that now have insider knowledge, and a company caught between a financial windfall and a moral dilemma. What started as an accidental discovery when scanning a few Pokémon packs has now turned into a full-blown industry shakeup. And this story was covered by 2 journalists from the New York Times via The Athletic. It's behind a paywall, so it might cost you a few bucks to read it, but I encourage everyone to try and read the full story. And part of the investigation was putting the scanner to the test. It's just a $60 box of Donruss Optic football, and they were able to identify that the hit card was a rookie card of a Raiders wide receiver. Card worth about $1. But more importantly, they were able to determine that this box did not contain a CJ Stroud card. So the $60 test proved the tech works, but all of that was just the tip of the iceberg. And so when the New York Times starts calling, a big question is, how would the industry react? Well, the response was mostly crickets. The article says manufacturers like Panini, Upper Deck, and Fanatics all declined interviews. And auction places like eBay and Golden also declined to speak, and deferred the issue back to sellers. The article gets a lot of quotes from Industrial Inspection's General Manager Keith Irwin. He wasn't able to elaborate fully because he says NDAs have been signed. But he shares this thought and says, it seems like publicly everybody wants us to stop, but in private, nobody wants us to stop because everybody that you can imagine has reached out to us. So the message is pretty loud and clear. The industry knows this is a problem, but no one wants to be the first to address it. The New York Times article also brings to light something that's been a growing concern in the hobby for years: breakers. And it points to the many online accusations that occur when box breakers unveil a disproportionate amount of hits from sealed products with a break. And a lot of you are probably familiar with how the hobby world has been questioning how certain breakers seem to defy the odds. And I found some helpful commentary from this guy called Teapot. He actually works with Jeff Wilson and appears often in Jeff's sports card investor videos as a data and analytics guy. And here he is on a channel he does with some of his collector buddies. I think this adds a bit of context to the whole breaker controversy.
2 years ago-ish, some suspicious stuff started happening with one of the largest breakers, not to be named, Backyard Breaks, who hit like 7 of the most important one-of-ones in a row from basketball and football from Panini products. And I did the math and I made some assumptions about how many they would have had to rip to hit those. And I determined that it was a statistical impossibility, not an improbability, but literally a statistical impossibility for them to have hit all these cards without having something funky going on, ensuring that they got these boxes.
And here's a bit more in discussion with Jeff Wilson here, where Teapot adds an interesting scenario that might occur.
My whole argument a couple of years ago, it's been almost 2 years since we brought this up about loaded boxes and all the allegations. I was very much of the camp that I didn't think the manufacturers had anything to do with trying to get people loaded boxes because of the risk to their brand. But as a breaker, it's the wild, wild west. You're trying to separate yourself. So when these breakers come out and go, where else but, and then insert their branding company, and they hit Nebula, 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 Nebula of the top 4 chases in a product, or all 3 of the key Flawless Logo Man, all 3 of the NT Logo Mans, and 2 of the Nebulas and 2 of the Prism Blacks of the top rookies in the product, I said it then, I'm doubling down on it. It is a statistical impossibility. It's not possible. It's not only improbable, it is not possible. And if this were ever subpoenaed to court, and a court in discovery said, you, breaker, need to tell us how many boxes you released, and you, manufacturer, need to tell us how many boxes were produced, it could be proven with statistics and admissible in court that there was fraud, that it is a statistical impossibility. That has been done in the past. There are court cases where that's happened, but that has happened, and it could happen.
So just another part of the story where the end is not yet written. So essentially when this article drops in December, it acts as a 6-month update on Industrial. And the New York Times seems to report the same thing. And just like in the earlier Sports Card Madness interview with Industrial rep Brad Kellis, definitely seems like Industrial Inspection had no idea what they stumbled into. Because initially their plan was to use this just as a case study, and a way to showcase their services to the aerospace or medical fields. GM Keith Irwin said he posted the info to his LinkedIn page in late June, and the post went viral. And within a week and a half, emails started rolling in. And the Times says he estimated it only took a week and a half from there to turn it into a full flooded service. And before long, the money started rolling in. And the article says that since ramping up the collectibles scanning in July, that they estimate the amount of scans to be in the thousands, and that the service now amounts to a sizable portion of Industrial's income. And in response, Industrial doubles down because the demand just keeps growing. Irwin says, how do we go fast enough to make it worth people to pay? And the article says the company has hired additional full-time staff to help with the card demand. So pretty wild to think that a huge part of their business now comes from working with collectors. And Irwin says, we laugh that you have rocket components sitting on one shelf and then cards on the other shelf. And so now just 6 months into this new endeavor, the Times asks Industrial a question that gets an interesting response. What's the biggest non-technical challenge they face entering in an unfamiliar niche space? And Irwin says it's a moral dilemma. And here we are back to the elephant in the room. And not a surprise that the New York Times makes this a big part of their story. And Irwin says, we've had to wrestle with that as a team, and some of us think differently about it. Some of us say it is what it is, we can do it. And others say it feels like we're participating in something that is very much a gray area, and we still wrestle with it. And actually Nick, our host from the Sports Card Madness channel, is part of this article too. He's quoted and says, the stance Industrial's taking is similar to what Napster was saying back in the early 2000s or late 90s. Nick's quoted as saying, I think ultimately they took the stance of Napster in a way like they're not committing fraud. And what these people do with their CT scan cards is not their problem, because they're not shepherds or stewards of the hobby. Oh, and a little fun fact for those of you who've grown up on Spotify and Apple Music, Napster was the peer-to-peer file sharing software that shook up the music industry back in the late 90s by skirting around copyright laws and allowing users to share MP3s. But after just 6 months in business and already having earned thousands of satisfied customers in the collectibles space, and money now starting to roll in the door for Industrial, there's really no turning back. And these 2 quotes seem to say it all. Keith Irwin says, we were a startup hungry for work. We're all workaholics without enough work. So we stumble upon this thing that nobody's done before, and all of a sudden we have clients in a brand new territory. I think where we land is that we are data people and we're very good at what we do. And if we're not doing it, then somebody else will. So pretty crazy to see this shift happen so fast. Seems like they didn't really know what they were getting into, and now it's too late to stop. Like a runaway train. All this taking place in just about 6 months. Oh, and they've now established box prices for scans. And as an example, the article states that the going rate to scan a box of 2023 Panini Flawless Football first off the line case, the cost to scan is $650. And the estimated cost to purchase that box is around $15,000. And each case comes with 2 boxes. Each box comes with 1 pack inside, 10 cards total. And even a simple calculation of $650 per box times thousands of satisfied customers, you're looking at revenue in the millions. So back in June, both Nick from Sports Card Madness and our Pokemon guy, OKJ Love, talked about how Industrial was looking at ways to potentially offer tracking, or maybe to create some type of database, and looking at some creative ways to verify if a box had been scanned. Some sort of a way to keep buyers and sellers somewhat protected. So what new ideas did they come up with? When the New York Times article confirms that Industrial seems to have made it pretty clear that they're going to keep all their scans anonymous. And Industrial GM Keith Irwin says, "We're not verifying our clients. A lot of them we assume are using fake emails, and we use Square credit card for processing, so we don't know who any of these people are, honestly." So no real surprise there. And according to Industrial's website, their stance is pretty clear. Our objective position is one of scientific ability and data-driven results. It is not our responsibility to determine the ethical positions and choices of others, and we do not accept responsibility for their actions. Well, that might be Industrial's stance, but once a scan box leaves their facility, what happens next? For buyers in the secondary market, that's a major problem. And what happens if a collector sells a scanned box, but doesn't disclose that they know what's inside? Well, the article speaks with Paul Lesko, a lawyer who specializes in hobby-related cases. And according to him, you might get more than just a slap on the wrist. And he says, while scanning packs and boxes may be legal, consumer fraud charges could result for the owner of scanned products if resold without disclosure. So is there trouble on the horizon for some of these sellers? And so to avoid any real trouble, he says, best case scenario, after scanning a pack or box, if you're going to resell it, disclose you scanned it. And at least for now, Industrial lets their clients decide on how to proceed through this gray area. GM Keith Irwin says, our quotes require clients to disclose to their potential buyers if they have CT scanned their sealed products. I don't know what that really means, but just another area of the hobby their collectors are going to have to pay attention to. But here's an interesting tidbit. According to the New York Times, they might also be working on something that could actually help the hobby in coming up with tamper-proof packaging. And the idea came from an unsuspected source. A passing train. And so Industrial's facility sits near railroad tracks. And what they were noticing was that the vibrations from passing trains was enough to disrupt their scans. That got them thinking, what if packaging can do the same thing? According to Industrial, they say, all new packaging has to do is introduce a slight vibration to the cards, and it makes it very challenging for us to read. It's a bit of a strange twist that the same company that made scanning a problem is now pitching itself as part of the solution. Hard to wrap your head around how that's going to work. And whether this actually happens or if card manufacturers even adopt it, that remains to be seen. But at the very least, there's a sign that change could be on the horizon. One thing I discovered during my deep dive and checking out a bunch of channels is that not all YouTubers get along. In particular, 2 people in our video. In the video by Sports Card Madness Nick, where he references the New York Times article, he calls out Jeff Wilson and definitely doesn't hold back. Definitely check out his full video. But needless to say, Nick definitely isn't a fan of Jeff Wilson, and in particular Jeff's continued narrative that most collectors don't need to worry.
This part really pisses me off. Jeff Wilson, the biggest clown in our industry, has repeatedly said that this doesn't affect 99% of collectors. I conducted a survey that said 21% of my followers would buy wax over $10,000 and are therefore affected. So this is just a clown thing to say. Jeff Wilson also has 3 to 4 conflicts of interest. They never would have conducted that initial cat scanning interview that I did. And he gets quoted in the article and direct link to the video.
So shots fired from Sports Card Madness. And so the New York Times article comes out in mid-December, and Nick from Sports Card Madness video comes out a few days later. Well, a few days before, Jeff Wilson released this video on the Jeff Wilson Show, where you might say that he fired a few shots of his own.
CT scanning. This has gotten a lot of noise again recently, in part because there's this certain person on social media, Nick Andrews, Boston card hunter, host of the Sports Card Madness podcast, that has made a lot of noise about CT scanning over the last several weeks. He keeps bringing the topic back to light.
Though Jeff Wilson does say some positive things and gives some credit, but definitely also fires a few shots.
But to Nick's credit, he has done investigative work. He has reached out to CT scanning companies, and what he's discovered is that it is possible to CT scan a fairly wide variety of boxes and to get a pretty decent sense of what is inside those boxes.
All right, and here's where they really disagree.
I also think that Nick has been overly alarmist about this problem, and he's taking a little bit of a shock jock mentality when it comes to his social media. He's posting a lot about it. He's being a little bit intimidating with his social media, I would say, a little bit shock worthy with his social media on this topic. I think a little too much so.
And here's probably one example of some shock jock style stuff.
All right, this is the most controversial interview we have ever done on the Sports Card Madness channel. Yeah, we gotta talk about this right now. So I'm gonna let the audience know. You think this is new and scary and these guys are ruining the world? Well, guess what? This has been around for a long time. So you were telling me offline.
So I think Jeff Wilson is referring to stuff like that. However, I think there's some big noise coming from both sides of the room.
Everybody calm down. All of those doomsday predictions you're currently hearing about how CT scanning is going to destroy the hobby, I'm here to tell you it's really not that big of a deal.
So lots of big noise coming from both camps. So some of it I think you have to filter out as just these guys being entertainers, but I think there's some important stuff we should be paying attention to. Here's a less loud take from Jeff Wilson, and I think he makes some valid points.
Is CT scanning an issue that most collectors should be concerned about? I'm going to say it's overblown for most collectors. Now, there's certain types of collectors and investors that should be terrified about it. It is an issue. It is a real issue. But here's the truth. 99% of the people that are walking in the door here at Cards HQ are buying hobby boxes that it would never make sense to CT scan.
So I agree with a lot of what he's saying. However, I disagree with Jeff Wilson saying that most collectors shouldn't be concerned. I think in a hobby where people are spending hundreds or even thousands of dollars on a single card or product, it's always important to be informed of what's going on. I think it's our job as a collector to always try and do your own due diligence, and that means staying on top of stories and new technologies and trends, especially the ones that might affect us financially. Doesn't mean we have to stop collecting or live in a state of fear, but to call this technology overblown, I think is too dismissive. Another thought I had is I'm wondering where this technology goes. And could we see automation and AI being introduced? Do we see a world where we take a lot of this out of human hands? Could we see computers being used in even more efficient ways to batch scan boxes and analyze the data faster? Could this speed the process up and then in turn also make it a cheaper service? Is there a future where this service is like $10 a pack? So to say this is just nothing to pay attention to is too dismissive in my opinion. On one more note, there's a quote from the Sports Card Madness channel earlier in the video where he calls out Jeff Wilson for having a conflict of interest. Just wanted to point out that one thing that Jeff Wilson references is Cards HQ in that previous clip. And so if you don't know, Cards HQ is the new hobby shop he opened in Atlanta. Definitely looking at the pics, it's definitely a lot larger than your regular LCS. Much bigger than Wally's card shop, which is the one I go to in Vancouver. So definitely check his place out if you're ever in Vancouver. So it's important to note that a hobby shop owner doesn't really benefit from any fear within the hobby. So you can kind of see why the content he puts out tends to be geared towards helping out put out the fire. And you can understand how a dismissive tone towards this technology starts to become part of the narrative. That's one of the main reasons I'm trying to share multiple takes on this subject. And here's a take from Jeff Wilson I definitely agree with.
It's not these everyday boxes that are being released that are the real problem for CT scanning. Now, the real problem, and there is a problem, is for really high-end sealed wax, and especially really high-end sealed wax that people are holding on to.
And so that brings us to some final words and then some questions. So feel free to leave a comment. Are you concerned, or do you think this is really nothing? Do you buy high-end boxes? Are you planning to sell any high-end boxes now based on any of this news? Here's a final word from Nick from Sports Card Madness. And he's referencing the New York Times article again, and the product currently that Industrial's having almost 0 issues with seeing inside.
And it mentions that Topps Dynasty is their favorite. It's the easiest to detect. It's a single package. It's just got 1 to 2 cards, typically 1 card. Super, super easy. I'm going to tell you guys right now, don't buy any Topps Dynasty on the secondary market ever, 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 ever again. It is so easy to see right here. That's a Max Verstappen card. There's your serial number, 10 out of 10. If you ever see this sold on eBay, 10 out of 10, this card, boom, you know it's been CAT scanned. You can actually trace the buyer.
Well, pretty sobering stuff to see. Maybe Nick is a bit loud here, but the underlining message and the dangers of owning specific types of wax is pretty clear. And so how is Jeff Wilson affected? Because he spends literally hundreds of thousands of dollars as a collector and also as a high-end wax collector and investor.
I have some old, expensive wax that I am now in the process of selling because of the fact that I'm like, you know what? People are going to forever be concerned that this wax was CT scanned. So it doesn't make sense for me to own a $30,000 plus case as I do right now of 2016 The Cup, a master case of 2016 The Cup with Connor McDavid patches potentially inside. When I go to sell that, my plan originally was I'm going to hold on to that until Connor McDavid eventually wins the Stanley Cup or makes the Hall of Fame. I was going to hold on to that case for years. I can't anymore because I'm worried that, 20 years from now, if I put that case up for sale, every buyer of that case potentially is just going to assume it was CT scanned. That sucks. And that is the effect of CT scanning. That is the part of the market that's getting affected. It's the high-end wax, and particularly those who like to invest and hold on to high-end wax, which, by the way, that was me. I like to invest and hold on to high-end wax. I'm not going to be doing it anymore.
I'm very curious to see what's going to happen to the market of what was once thought of as a sound investment and a safe store of value. Only time's going to tell with that. And just a few more final words of warning to all you collectors. Be careful and do your due diligence, and always look to buy from trusted sources.
What we're looking at here with the YouTube video, this is $1,500 equipment. There are many hits that you can pull out of these packs. There are many of these packs, these vintage packs, that are worth more than that. So it doesn't take long for someone to make their money back if they're looking to do some wrong. Hopefully anyone that's doing this is disclosing it. And again, my prediction is it's going to end up being that you have to do it with every single loose pack. It's kind of where, unless you know exactly who it's coming from and you trust them 100%, this is some scary stuff.
And here's Teapot, back again with some of his collector buddies from their Spitballin' Cards podcast. Here's a good explanation of a scenario that could be happening right under our noses.
You buy cases and cases of said high-end product, you ship it off, the Flawless, the Dynasty, the whatever, you scan them all, you know exactly which one has the big hit, and then you sell the rest of them and take probably a small loss on those from fees, but you get the big payday of hitting potentially what might be a 5 or 6 or more figure card, depending on what the product is, if you actually track it down and find that card.
But here's one of Teapot's collector buddies with a reminder that old school scammy stuff still goes on without any need for high-tech equipment.
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned this before on the channel once, but there are hobby shops that do engage in sketchy behavior with, they'll open up a case of Bowman Draft and they'll rip, there's 8 boxes in a case. They'll rip the first 3, and then until they pull that orange, and then they'll sell the rest, because often there's one orange auto in a case. So that's just one example, and I've heard this multiple times, multiple different places doing it.
And then one more gem from Teapot, good story here, which shows me that this is something to pay attention to, because we don't know who might end up using this technology.
I talked to one of my good friends is a radiologist, and I talked to him about it, and I told him about this last year. Like, hey, we found out this is going on. Isn't this crazy? And he said, he's like, oh yeah. I mean, that could definitely be used. And I said, how hard would it be for somebody who's not a radiologist, who didn't go to medical school, to learn how to do this? And he said, not difficult at all. You could probably learn it in a week. Like, it's not difficult to run a CT. He said the hardest thing about a CT scanner is configuring the machine properly. But if you have it set to the right settings, you could run it and any nincompoop could figure it out. Which, I mean, when you're looking at I think a lot of the science behind being a radiologist is like reading scans for actual like tumors and stuff, not looking to see that you can see Barry Larkin's face like on a card, you know, oh, that says Ellie De La Cruz on the auto.
So is CT scanning going to become easier and more accessible? Only time will tell. And how it affects our hobbies remains to be seen. And whether you're a Pokemon collector or a sports card collector, here's a really good final point from our Pokemon guy, OKJ Love.
Basically, Pokemon isn't bulletproof and any speculative asset shouldn't be assumed as such. Collecting cards themselves and physically holding them, putting them in your binder, sharing them, trading them, slabbing them, whatever you do with them remains the least risky path, because at the end of the day, you still have the card and the card is the card. Nothing changes that.
Well, that's the show, everyone. If you enjoyed the video, I encourage you to leave a comment. So share your thoughts. Anyways, thanks for watching and we'll see you in the next one.